When a listing first goes live, the early numbers hit you fast. A few views, a couple of clicks, maybe a favorite, and your brain instantly turns that into a story. It is working, or it is failing. And because you are tired, that story feels like certainty. This video is about one thing. The main thing Etsy sellers misread in those first days. Not because you are careless, because the early data is easy to misunderstand. Early performance looks like feedback, but it is not finished feedback. It is a first draft. It is the system taking a quick look, then adjusting. It is shoppers behaving in tiny moments, not making big decisions. If you treat those first signals like a final verdict, you end up changing things too fast or losing confidence too early. So let's slow it down and talk about what the early numbers can actually tell you and what they cannot. The first days after you publish are emotionally loud. You check more often. You notice every tiny change. A small spike feels like relief. A small drop feels like danger. And because there is so much effort sitting behind the listing, it feels natural to believe the system is judging you right away. That is the lived experience of early listing performance. It pulls you into monitoring mode, even if you promised yourself you would not. A favorite can feel like proof you nailed it. A day with fewer views can feel like something went wrong. But those are small signals, and we often attach big meaning to them. It is not irrational. It is just how people work when they care about something. The problem is that early Etsy data is noisy. It is full of randomness and short-term motion. It is easy to mistake motion for direction. Early on, a lot of sellers compare a new listing to other listings, or to what they saw last month. They look at a few days and decide it is underperforming, or they see a burst and decide it is a winner. But the first days are not stable. The environment changes hour to hour. Different shoppers, different search contexts, different placements. So when you compare too soon, you are comparing two moving targets and pretending they are fixed. This is where people start reacting. They change photos. They rewrite titles. They swap tags. They edit the description. Not because they love tweaking, but because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Doing something feels better than doing nothing. And early performance creates a lot of uncertainty. The tricky part is that reacting quickly can make you feel productive, while also making it harder to learn what was actually happening in the first place. Sometimes the early views look strong, and then they disappear. Sometimes the early views look weak, and later the listing starts moving. Both happen. That alone should tell you early performance is not a simple scorecard. It is a snapshot taken while things are still shifting. If you catch a good day, it can feel like success. If you catch a slow day, it can feel like failure. But neither may represent the listing's real baseline. There is also this feeling that if you just get the early stage right, everything will lock in. Like the first few days are a make or break window, and you have to manage it perfectly. That belief creates pressure. It makes you stare at numbers and look for hidden rules. And it makes you interpret every early change as something you caused. Most of the time, that sense of control is exaggerated. Early performance is not fully in your hands. Here is the one core problem. Etsy sellers often misread early listing performance as a verdict on the listing's quality. They treat early numbers like the system has decided yes or no, good or bad. But early performance is mostly the system collecting a small sample of behavior. It is observation, not judgment. It is a short period where the system is trying to understand what happens when the listing is shown in a few different contexts. A sample is not the whole story. A sample is limited by who happened to see the listing and what they were trying to do in that moment. Some shoppers click quickly, some browse slowly, some are window shopping, some are actually ready to buy. If your first sample contains more curious browsers than buyers, the numbers look one way. If it contains more ready buyers, it looks another way. That difference is not your worth as a seller. It is sampling. Early performance often has motion. It rises, dips, rises again. And we want that motion to mean something clear. We want it to tell us the listing is being boosted, or suppressed, or rescued. But motion can simply mean the listing was shown in a different place to a different group. A change in impressions can happen without any deeper conclusion. So the misread is taking movement and turning it into a message, when it might just be a shift in exposure. Think of the early phase as the system testing fit between the listing and the shopper's intent. When the listing is shown, do people click because it matches what they searched for? When they land, do they stay because it matches what they expected? That is what the system is trying to learn. So early performance is less about whether the listing is good, and more about whether the listing is clearly positioned for the right people. Fit is different from quality, but our brains do not love that. We want a simple label. Winner or loser, keep or delete, fix or move on. When you are exhausted, simple labels feel like relief. The problem is that early Etsy signals do not support simple labels. They are too early, too small, too context-dependent. When you label too soon, you either abandon something that could have settled, or you over-celebrate something that was just a lucky first sample. And then there is the knock-on effect. If you change a listing repeatedly in the early phase, you distort your ability to learn from it. You do not get a clean read on what shoppers were responding to. You only get a blur of edits and outcomes. This is why early performance can feel confusing for months. The seller keeps trying to interpret results, but the underlying thing keeps changing. The misread starts the cycle, and the cycle creates more noise. The stabilizing insight is not a trick. It is a mindset shift. Early performance is a tiny piece of information that needs time and context before it becomes useful. Instead of asking, "Is this listing good?" the better question is, what kind of shoppers did this listing reach first? And did it match what they expected? That is calmer. It keeps you grounded. And it protects your trust in your own work while the system is still gathering signals. If you are going to read early numbers at all, read them as alignment signals, not approval signals. When you see clicks but fast exits, that suggests a mismatch between the promise and the landing experience. When you see fewer clicks but longer engagement, that suggests a smaller but more aligned audience. You are not chasing a score. You are noticing whether the listing is speaking clearly to the right person. Alignment is something you can improve without panic. The other stabilizing piece is giving yourself room to observe before you act. Not forever, just enough to let the early noise settle into something interpretable. When you hold steady for a bit, you can see patterns instead of moments. And you can make changes for a reason, not because a number dipped on a Tuesday. This reduces stress. It also makes your next decision cleaner, because you are working from a clearer picture of what is happening. The simplest principle is this: do not let week 1 define the listing. Early numbers are a sample, not a verdict. When you treat them like a verdict, you either lose confidence or you start chasing noise. When you treat them like a sample, you stay calm and you learn. You are not behind because a listing had a quiet start. More explanations like this coming to the channel.